Across America, BP supports more than 275,000 jobs to keep energy flowing. Jobs like building grid-scale solar energy in Ohio and producing gas with fewer operational emissions in Texas. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
Ophthalmologist Dr. Strauss has seen firsthand how the metaverse is helping surgeons practice the procedures to treat cataracts.
Cataracts are the primary cause of avoidable blindness.
He works with a virtual reality training platform developed by Fundamental VR and Orbis International to help surgeons develop the muscle memory they need. The result? More confident, capable surgeons. And even more importantly,
Patients who can see.
explore more stories like Dr. Strauss's at meta.com/metaverseimpact.
I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Welcome to News du Jour. You may be wondering, why am I, Annie Bowles, here hosting this podcast? I usually start by telling people I'm a political baby. You see, my parents met working on Capitol Hill. By the time I was 2, I had been in my first political commercial and even got lost crawling around the West Wing. Don't worry, Al Gore found me. My family then moved abroad when I was 9, and I attended an international school in Brussels with kids from all over the world. And it is this type of global perspective that I also bring to our show. I graduated from American University in DC after studying political science and art history, as well as interning on both sides of Capitol Hill. I even interned down the hall from where my parents met. I'm now pursuing a professional certificate in journalism at NYU in conjunction with Rolling Stone magazine. I guess I was always that friend in the group who cared deeply about not just what was going on politically, but also globally. I often kept my own friends informed through high school and into young adulthood, so I guess I've always done a version of this show. I'm genuinely passionate about following the news, and I'm here to break it down for you guys every weekday. We always strive to be a calmer space to get your news. Or, as one listener put it, like getting your news from a well-informed bestie. I'm so glad you're here. Hi guys, happy Monday. Welcome back to the News du Jour. Today we will be spending the bulk of our episode breaking down and recapping President Biden's State of the Union address. But before that, we're going to cover one mini story. Let's jump in. So Trump posted $91 million in bond in the E. Jean Carroll case, according to CBS News. And this was basically to facilitate his appeal, as I'm understanding it. He had to pay at least part of that big payment in order to move forward in the court proceedings. So he paid that, and onward and upward. We'll definitely keep you guys posted as his appeal continues onward. So there's a lot to go over when it comes to Biden's State of the Union address, in my opinion. As a reminder, in case you're new here, I do this kind of bullet style, I'll kind of walk through different quotes and different things that he touched on throughout his speech. Of course, this is available to watch and stream online for free. So, the White House puts it on their YouTube channel, but all the major news outlets will have the same exact thing recorded. So you guys can always go and listen to it for yourself. And honestly, I really encourage you guys to do that if you're up for it, because it's just better to get it from the horse's mouth and get your own opinion on his vibe and his tone versus just hearing it from me. But I will always be here to break down his speeches for you, and I will also be sure to pull out any historical context or just things I noticed after watching so many of these over the years. Let's jump in. So I actually thought that Biden's opening line was somewhat funny. He said, if I were smart, I would go home now. And, State of the Union addresses are tough for presidents. They can be this great, strong moment. They can be a huge flop or somewhere in the middle. No one really knows going in, but during the speech, they are certain to face heckling from opposing leaders. That's something that really began with President Barack Obama. So they're not particularly fun for the president themselves. The president is definitely in the hot seat. Biden immediately went to Ukraine and called out Trump and Putin's relationship right off the bat. Biden said that on January 6th, rioters, quote, took a dagger to the throat of American democracy, end quote. So I thought that was definitely a dramatic quote, and I was kind of wary, like, oh my gosh, we're starting off like so dramatic with this, really intense line. Like, is that going to be the tone of this entire speech? But at the same time, I was kind of into this because of how grave the consequences of January 6th could have been. I think it definitely worked and it definitely was poetic. And I will say the rest of his speech was not like that. He also said January 6th was the biggest threat to our nation since the Civil War. Biden touched, of course, on IVF, which is a huge topic of conversation right now. He used a specific story of a woman who used IVF to get pregnant initially with her first child, and then she tried to go back and have a second baby via IVF, but wasn't able to due to the Alabama ruling that we have discussed at length here on our show. Biden also thanked Vice President Harris for helping him to champion reproductive freedoms. He shared stories of women having to cross state borders to get life-saving health care due to strict abortion laws. He touched on instances of incest and rape as well. But he said women are, quote, not without electoral or political power, and you're about to find out just how much power, end quote. This got screams, cheering, and squeals from the audience, a standing ovation from most people who were there. He said they found out in 2022 and 2023, and they'll find out again in 2024. Biden said that our economy was literally on the quote-unquote brink, but now is, quote, the envy of the world, end quote. He said that unemployment is at a 50-year low. He said, quote, the state of our union is strong and getting stronger, end quote. And to this, people began chanting 4 more years, 4 more years. And this is something, just for historical context, that pretty much every single president says. And if they didn't say that the state of our union is strong, you'd know something was very, very wrong. He said he wants to give public school teachers a, quote, raise, end quote, and the crowd cheered. I hope that happens. That would be fan-fucking-tastic. I mean, not even a raise. Like, they need their salaries, like, doubled, especially with all the inflation. Anywho, that's just my 2 cents. But he called out shrinkflation, which is basically where we see the same size bag of chips suddenly has less chips in it. And we've all noticed this, I'm sure. It's how companies are essentially cutting costs, but making the same amount of money coming in. Biden has said that it's wrong, and he supports legislation that fights against shrinkflation. Biden says that he wants laws to ensure that ticket companies like airlines, concerts, etc. tell you the full price up front and don't wait until you're like at the checkout to add on a bunch of fees, which we all know happens. Actually, I had a really hard time with that on Vrbo. That's a place where, I saw one price and then we got to the end and it was like quite a bit more expensive. Biden talked about illegal immigrants killing one family's children, and he said he understands as someone who has also lost a child. He acknowledged that there are thousands of similar deaths in America, but he said he refuses to demonize immigrants and would not say that they are, quote, poisoning the blood of America, end quote, the way that Trump has. And he said he would not separate immigrant families. He specifically said that he wants to shorten the length of time that it takes to get an immigration hearing, because as it stands now, it can take up to 6 years to get a hearing. Migrants know this, and they know that then they would have 6 years to try and make a life here and really establish themselves and live in safety for 6 years. That seems worth the risk oftentimes. And he would like to shorten that time to 6 weeks, so as there is less incentive to basically make the journey here in the first place, knowing that they'd pretty quickly be sent back. He called out Trump for doing nothing on gun violence, asking for a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, as well as universal background checks. Biden then transitioned to talking about Israel and Gaza. He said that the past few months have been, quote, gut-wrenching for so many people, the Israeli people, the Palestinian people, end quote. He acknowledged that October the 7th was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. He acknowledged the rampant sexual violence that took place on October the 7th. He acknowledged that there are still over 100 hostages being held by Hamas. He said we will work, quote unquote, around the clock until we bring home all the hostages, including Evan and Paul from Russia. He said that Israel has the right to go after Hamas. He said Hamas could end the fighting by simply releasing the hostages and surrendering to Israel, and that would be a way to end the war right now. He said that Israel also has a fundamental responsibility, though, to protect civilians in Gaza. And this, of course, got cheers from the crowd. He said that he is working nonstop to get more aid into Gaza and to get a 6-week ceasefire, as well as all the hostages freed. As we predicted on Monday, the president also pledged to create a temporary pier right off the coast of Gaza, where aid could easily be shuttled into the hands of aid workers and then, of course, distributed to the Palestinians struggling the most. He said that they are beginning to work tonight, so that was late Thursday night, so this could be up and running somewhat soon. And he was trying to basically increase the amount of aid that we're sending into Gaza by quite a bit. He also said the only solution is a two-state solution when it comes to this issue, and that he has been a lifelong supporter of Israel, and no one has a stronger relationship to Israel than he has. Transitioning away from Israel and Gaza, Biden said that he wanted to ban AI voice interpretations, which, fantastic, but how though? And he also said he wanted to increase, security measures around children online generally. He also said he wants to end cancer as we know it, which don't really know what that means either. But super interesting, Biden ended by making a pitch for why his age actually makes him a great president. And this was a really interesting angle to me because obviously Biden's age is unavoidable. I mean, he looks older, he speaks like someone older, he is older. But he said he wants to give hate no safe harbor, but other people his age don't feel that way, alluding to Trump and reminding people that actually Trump and Biden are about the same age. Biden then joked about how he used to not be allowed on Senate elevators to go vote because he actually looked too young to be a senator. But he said whether he looked too young or too old, he's always followed the same guiding principles because he knows what endures and he knows what is our North Star. And he took that moment to point out that he was vice president to the first Black president and is now president to the first female vice president. He ended with, quote, "The issue facing our nation is not about how old we are, but how old our ideas are. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution, those are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas. That will only take us back. To lead America, the land of possibilities, you need a vision for the future. Tonight, you've heard mine." End quote. I will note, though, he did fumble his words, I would say at least 3 times. And he was coughing quite a bit. And the coughing, I think, actually was more like distracting than fumbling the words. But at the same time, it is important to note, in case you guys didn't know this, President Biden had a speech impediment like since he was a young child. And this is something he always references, is that like, look, you can look through my entire career and I fumbled my words through my entire career because I've actually done that since I started talking in my life. So he's someone who had to have like a speech therapist and things like that as a child. So, I don't think it necessarily has to do with his age, but it also could have to do with his age. I mean, the man's in his 80s. So anyway, that's just an interesting topic of debate, and whether we need to draw some sort of line in the sand when it comes to how old a person could be president.
BP added more than $70 billion to the U.S. economy in 2022 by making investments from coast to coast. Investments like building charging hubs for fleets of electric buses in California and starting up new infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
Ophthalmologist Dr. Strauss has seen firsthand how the metaverse is helping surgeons practice the procedures to treat cataracts.
Cataracts are the primary cause of avoidable blindness.
He works with a virtual reality training platform developed by Fundamental VR and Orbis International to help surgeons develop the muscle memory they need. The result? More confident, capable surgeons. And even more importantly,
Patients who can see.
explore more stories like Dr. Strauss's at meta.com/metaverse impact.
I wanted to touch on, before we go though, some audience moments, like what was happening in the audience while Biden was giving his speech, and then some news outlet reactions. Let's jump in. So in the audience, there was a group of women who were all wearing white. So they were kind of hard to miss. And this was the Democratic Women's Caucus. And they actually wore white in support of women's reproductive rights. And I think that's why, Biden got that big, like, squealing, cheering, moment happening when he said that, elected officials were going to find out how powerful women are. I think that big group just like jumped up, immediately reacted. I also wanted to note that certain women who were known as the squad, or at least 3 members of the squad, I didn't see AOC there, so I think their 4th member, she maybe wasn't even at the State of the Union, but the 3 of the squad members were wearing Palestinian scarves as a form of protest and asking for a ceasefire. President Biden also got a lot of heckling, not surprisingly. So the first amount of heckling happened when he said that Trump failed in, quote, the most basic presidential duty, the duty to care, end quote. And someone in the audience yelled out, lies. It sounded like a male voice, but I'm not sure who said it. There was also heckling when President Biden was talking about his plans for the border. And then when Biden said that we are safer now than we were when he took office and began providing statistics to that effect, he got this, again, this like man's voice. It was like kind of a strange voice, but they were yelling something like definitely words, not like booing or, cheering or anything like that. It was definitely like yelling words, but you could not make out what this person was saying. So it was really just distracting more than anything else. And again, I'm not sure who said it or what they said, but it was definitely a man's voice. And then I wanted to touch on things that are being noted on both sides of the aisle. So sort of some feedback on this speech from both sides. I would say that NPR's overall reaction to this speech was positive. However, they did point out that they felt when Biden went off script with Marjorie Taylor Greene was in the audience and was shouting the name of someone who was likely killed by an illegal immigrant, an American citizen. And Biden responded by saying she was killed by an illegal, which, that terminology NPR was pointing out will probably not fare well with progressive voters, like labeling someone's identity as an illegal. And that was just something interesting. But I feel like that was like the major flop that they pointed out from a progressive standpoint. And then when it came to Fox, when I went over to Fox, they had headlines that read, quote, Senator Katie Britt says Biden used, quote, none of his time to bring together America, end quote, end quote. Yeah, so those were some of the thoughts on both sides of the aisle. I would venture to guess that the far right has even more extreme criticism of Biden's speech than that headline from Fox, but that was actually the only Fox News article I saw on their homepage about Biden's speech. So I didn't dig too hard, but at the same time, that was the first piece of criticism that, you see when you go to Fox News's page. So I always like to give you guys sort of a perspective from both sides of the aisle. If you guys are curious as to my particular takeaway or my personal opinion on this speech, this is my opinion. I would say, for the most part, Biden's speech was exactly the talking points we've heard from him over and over again. Not much was new in this speech. He reiterated the same things he wants to be working on. However, I do feel like it was very interesting that he ended off with his age. The fact is, his age isn't going anywhere. People are going to continue to talk about it. He's only getting older. So I do think that it was smart of him to address it head on and really to make a pitch for why age equals wisdom versus, some old geezer. I think also throughout the speech, another takeaway I would say is that he was upbeat, he was smiling, he was laughing, he actually seemed to be enjoying himself, despite the fact that he, openly joked at the beginning, like, I should just go home. I do think it seemed like he was playful, he was in the moment, and ultimately having a good time with the speech. So that was, a welcomed change, I would say, versus like the intensity of American politics as of late, because things are really intense right now. So it was refreshing to see him sort of smile and be at ease for the most part. And again, I would say his stances were pretty much what we have come to expect from President Biden. And that for today is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "The same fire that can warm your home can also burn it down." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review on that platform or a shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us to be able to keep creating the news du jour and reach more people who need a calmer space to consume the news. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugar-free media, and that is also linked in our show notes. You can follow us on social media at newsdujour.podcast on both Instagram and TikTok. You can follow my personal account at It's Annie Bowles on both platforms as well. Any little noises you may hear in the background are my rescue pup. He has a little separation anxiety and always records with me. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from
BP added more than $70 billion to the U.S. economy in 2022. Investments like acquiring America's largest biogas producer, Archaea Energy, and starting up new infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.